Hey everybody, I'm very excited to be here today. Welcome to our music podcast. This is going to be a really interesting episode. I'm joined by two of my favorite people, Mr. Patrick Klein and Shane Staniford. And today we have a really interesting topic we'll be discussing. When you think about the availability of music and how kids are able to access everything, inevitably they will run across music by performers where perhaps they realize they can listen, but they can no longer see that performer live, whether it's Kurt Cobain or Jimi Hendrix, the list goes on and on. I know, speaking personally, one artist that I wish I had had the opportunity to see perform live was Randy Rhoads, which leads us to our topic today. Patrick had the unique opportunity to see Randy Rhoads perform in August of 1981. So we're going to be spending some time discussing that. How are you guys doing?
Great. Hello, Darren. Hello, Shane.
Thanks for stopping in, Pat. I'm really looking forward to this. As we, were talking before, this just wasn't your average tour stop, and we'll get into all the details. But there was just so much drama that happened leading up to this show. I'll just say it right out of the gate quickly, and then I have a million questions for you. But basically, in a drunken rage, Ozzy tried to strangle and kill Sharon at the hotel in South Bend, Indiana. In the late hours of the night before, in the early morning hours of the show that night, and then he, ended up going to the venue and sleeping there, and with a broken nose and all this sort of stuff. So this isn't your just ordinary tour stop, and there were hundreds of tour stops that this band did in the 2 years with the Diary of the Madman and Blizzard of Oz tour. So not only having you here to tell the story of how you were able to see Randy Rhoads, but then finding out all this additional information about everything that happened that week, and especially right there in South Bend, is going to be fascinating. And not to mention the Def Leppard aspect that I'm so excited about too. This is like super stardom Def Leppard. This is
right.
Def Leppard.
Right after their second record had come out.
This High and Dry tour, and this is the era of Def Leppard that I'm just fanatical over, and I was too young to see them during this period. So we'll get into it, but I have a bunch of questions and excited to hear about the show.
Just to back up a little bit, I want to take an opportunity just to give our viewers an appreciation for who Randy Rhoads was. Presumably most people watching this video already know, but in the event that you don't, Randy Rhoads was a revered guitarist, and he was a rock music icon. He's probably best known for his brief tenure as the guitarist who helped catapult Ozzy Osbourne's solo career into the stratosphere during the 1980s. His brilliant guitar work is enshrined on both Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman, two of the most important albums from the 1980s hard rock music genre. On March 19, 1982, Rhoads was killed in a freak plane crash that happened just outside of Leesburg, Florida. This tragic and senseless loss has created a void that's still felt by many of his fans today. Now, in August 1981, and correct me if I'm wrong, Patrick was about to begin his senior year in high school. And as the summer of 1981 neared its apex, Patrick and a group of friends had the special opportunity to watch Randy Rhoads perform live as part of an Ozzy Osbourne concert that took place at the Morris Civic Auditorium on Saturday, August 29th, 1981 in South Bend, Indiana. This concert was part of the second leg of the Blizzard of Oz tour, which began in early August of 1981. And the final point I just want to make is that a lot of the information that we'll be referencing is from a book that was written by Rudy Sarzo. And that book, let's give you guys,
Rudy Sarzo, Darren?
is called Off the Rails. So a lot of the information that we're citing was depicted in this book, just so everybody knows. It's an incredible book. And if this period of time interests you, I can't recommend it highly enough. So with that, let's jump in a time machine and go back to 1981. Patrick, tell us about the music scene as from the vantage point of a high school student in 1981.
Well, 1981, first of all, I remember that as being an awesome summer. I was going into my senior year, and all these great records were out, like the apex of this, and the beginning, really, of this 80s rock movement. You had, Back in Black was out. Def Leppard was on the scene. They had just released High and Dry, and I remember jamming out to that record. And really, then there were no CDs, so it was either the record or the cassette, which I carried around in my 1976 Ford Torino station wagon in a Sony boombox. Me and my buddies would drive around with that, with our AC/DC cassettes. And Def Leppard, we were just getting into Def Leppard, and it was just, it was a really free time. Things were good in America. We were teenagers.
Yeah.
Going into this show, before you went to it, you were aware of Def Leppard then.
Oh,
so
we loved Def Leppard. In fact, I went to see Def Leppard. I really, Ozzy was kind of secondary for me. I was a huge Def Leppard fan from their first album. That was my first concert.
You saw them on the On Through the Night tour?
Yeah, I saw them right after they released their first album. They played in Chicago with the Scorpions. That was my first concert. And so we were all into Def Leppard, and in my high school band, we played all these Def Leppard songs from the first and second album. And so this second album came out, and it was really different from their first album. They got Mutt Lange to produce, and it had this really exciting next level energy to it.
Yeah. So going into the concert, you were a huge Def Leppard fan. You were aware of their songs and their albums. Were you aware of Randy Rhoads? Did you have an appreciation at that point for what you were about to witness?
I did, yes. So, that was a bonus that Ozzy was playing, and that he had this, Randy Rhoads. He was sort of, you had your Eddie Van Halen, who had already kind of introduced this kind of tapping style, but Randy Rhoads took it almost to the next level with almost a classical style, and you mix that with Ozzy's dark lyrics, and it really created almost like a gothic sound, and the rest of his band was just fantastic also. He had Tommy
Aldrich.
Yeah, Tommy Aldrich on the drums, Rudy Sarzo on bass.
Go ahead, Shane. Go ahead.
Which I also wanted to bring up, because I know that, Kiss is much like Darren and myself, Kiss is kind of where it all started with you. Seeing Ozzy or being aware of him and Randy Rhoads, was there any sort of Black Sabbath connection for you? Was Ozzy in any way looked at as an older artist, someone from the 70s, Black Sabbath, maybe?
Yes, so for me, because I wasn't that really into Black Sabbath. So Ozzy, to me, was kind of like a legacy guy. He was, Ozzy Osbourne from Black Sabbath, and then he got this new band with this kind of really gnarly sound. It's a Black Sabbath-ish sound, but it had a different sound, and that was largely because of Randy Rhoads, what he brought to the table with his style.
And at that time, when now you have at the same time you have Dio fronting Black Sabbath, was that anything that you were into? Just because of Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, those albums were also so iconic and different than the late 70s Sabbath albums. Were those albums of interest to you around your radar at that time? Or
they were on my radar, but I really wasn't, like I said, I wasn't like a Sabbath fan. So, I guess when Dio took over, I didn't really follow the change that much. My brother was really into that, and some of my friends, but I wasn't so much a Sabbath fanatic.
Gotcha.
At that point.
The other day, Shane and I recorded a podcast that exclusively covered Kiss during their Creatures of the Night tour. And one of the interesting things that we mentioned, and I'm going to do the same here tonight, is the notion of what a contrast exists when you compare, the niche of hard rock and heavy metal, especially in the early 80s, to what was happening more in commercial music circles. And just to give everybody a little perspective, I have, and I'll just quickly read this. Here's the top 10 for Saturday, August 29th, 1981. The number one song in America was Endless Love by Diana Ross and Lionel Richie, followed by Slow Hand by the Pointer Sisters. Number 3 was the theme from The Greatest American Hero. 4 was Stop Dragging My Heart Around. 5 was Jesse's Girl by Rick Springfield. 6 was Queen of Hearts, and so on. So you get a sense of what was happening if you turned on rock radio or pop radio at the time, and how different that is, sonically speaking, when we contrast that with Def Leppard or Ozzy Osbourne.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at that time, and I guess they still kind of have it now, but it was really, then they had, a lot of that was driven by radio and Billboard and people buying records, but radio was much more of a vehicle.
Yes.
To propel artists and the different genres. So there were all these, especially in the Midwest, like where I grew up near Chicago, was just like a hot spot for all these album-oriented rock artists, like Cheap Trick and Kiss and Def Leppard and Ozzy and AC/DC, and even like more obscure bands like April Wine or Triumph. That stuff was all over the radio on these album-oriented rock stations.
Which I wanted to ask you a question. I mean, this kind of all ties into like the British wave, the new wave of heavy metal that was, everything coming in from England at the time, and even Def Leppard to a certain degree with their earlier work, was almost looked at as a one of these new wave of British heavy metal bands. But I had a question, especially where you grew up, those album-oriented rock, for instance, like one of my favorite bands too, not terribly well known in the United States, but UFO. But they're huge in Chicago.
Well, what's interesting, I saw another concert at this same place was Def Leppard and UFO.
Oh.
So this place, the Morris Civic.
I was born at the wrong time, man.
Yeah, and the Morris Civic was this little theater, which is kind of like the Beacon Theater in New York. It's about 3,000 seats. Really nice theater setting. You could always get great seats. There wasn't really a bad seat in the house.
And that's a question I have for you. Was this a general admission show, or did they actually they had seats?
They had seats, but unlike now, where the security crews are like, the brown shirt Nazis, where if you move, you get clubbed. You could, the unique thing about this theater, Morris Civic, was once the lights went down, there was a scramble for the front of the stage. Like if you could make it to the front, they'd just let you stay there. And the cool thing about this Ozzy show, especially now what we know about Randy Rhoads, was we did our thing. We'd already been to several shows here, so we knew the drill. Lights go down, run down to the front of the stage. So we were right at the front of the stage.
Not necessarily the safest thing in the world. I mean, that's why, Darren and I grew up in the time of general admission shows in these hockey arenas in upstate New York. And it was like first come, first served, just a mad dash, for the front, And I think there was that Who Tragedies probably just a couple years before in Ohio.
Right.
But yeah, that was kind of the norm back then, versus now, which is, like you said, it's
way
different.
And that first Def Leppard show that I saw was at the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago. Again, a general admission thing. We waited outside in the summer all day in this huge line because it's general admission, and then you would just run in and grab whatever seat you could. But the Morris Civic, it was assigned seats, I'm pretty sure. And, but once the lights went down, you could just, they'd allow you to go run to the front of the stage. So
you're telling us you got to the front?
We got to the front. Yeah, we were at the front. Like right in front of Randy Rhoads. In fact, I was just talking to my buddy, Mike Barthel, who's my high school bandmate and compadre. He was telling me he was right. We were both, right on the stage, but he was directly in front of Randy Rhoads, was like flipping his guitar, toggle switch, and, high-fiving him and stuff. And he said Randy Rhoads was really cool about it. He just let him do whatever.
Wow.
So we were right there. We were right in the front of the stage for this concert. But it was a really, now that we know from Rudy Sarzo's book, and I don't think you mentioned that Rudy Sarzo was the bass player for Ozzy.
Yes.
And he wrote this book. But now we know from reading this book, at that time, it was like a crazy show because Ozzy was acting insane. We already know Ozzy does crazy stuff. So the lights go down. You can ask, we saw Def Leppard first, of course, as the opening band, which was phenomenal.
Now, am I right that I was also kind of looking up that particular tour? Is it true? And I'm sure this is common for opening bands anyway, but they only played 7 songs. Does that sound about right?
That sounds about right. Yeah, it was a short set. I don't remember, how many songs or anything.
Right.
Yeah, it seemed like they played for maybe 30, 45 minutes or something.
So this is one of the things that we're getting to in terms of the core of this conversation is that this particular concert was marked with a lot of tension. So it might be worth just backtracking a little bit and providing a little bit of detail in terms of what happened. So on August 27th, which was a Friday in 1981, Ozzy's band, they performed at the Circle Theater in Indianapolis. And one of the interesting things that Rudy mentions in his book is apparently that show was recorded. It was recorded as some part of a live broadcast. I'd love to know where that recording is or if it's accessible. Right after they finished performing, they apparently, dropped their gear and they ran across the street because the Jackson 5 was performing at the Market Square Arena right across the street. And Sharon was really interested in checking out their stage show. I guess they had some advanced theatrics at the time, and this was something that she envisioned incorporating into the upcoming Diary of a Madman tour. And she thought it was brilliant. And she's like, Ozzy, this is what we have to do. We have to have these sort of stage theatrics incorporated into the show. You can't just be up there making peace signs and wearing your fringe jacket. We have to up the ante. So they pack up, they get in the bus, and they make the short drive to South Bend, Indiana. And at that point, apparently Ozzy started drinking and he, sort of dived into a state of depression. They checked into a hotel in South Bend called the American Inn. Is that familiar to you, Patrick?
I can't say that it is.
Mm-hmm. So they get checked in and a
Midwestern, hotel though. The American Inn.
The American Inn. As they get checked in, everyone goes to their room, and Rudy Sarzo apparently, hears this commotion out in the corridor, and some sort of argument's taking place. So he cracks the door open and looks, and it's Ozzy and Sharon involved in this altercation. And it was bad. Apparently Ozzy was choking Sharon, and she said to the bodyguard, "Get him off me," or do what you have to do. So he came over and he punched Ozzy. Yeah. Punched Ozzy in the nose. And
the security guard.
The security guard, right. So he basically stumbles off and heads to the venue, right, to the arena where they were.
Ozzy, that is, yeah.
Ozzy, yeah, and proceeds to spend the rest of the evening drinking and indulging with the crew. So needless to say, the next day he's in rough shape. Whether he's hungover, he's got a broken nose.
And he was doing cocaine all night with this quote unquote broken nose with the crew.
No one was sure if he was able to perform that night or was willing to perform. He sometimes would threaten to go home. He didn't want to perform anymore. He was just in a real state of disarray. So interestingly enough, the show that you saw, up until literally the band hit the stage, no one was quite sure if Ozzy was going to join them.
Which explains a lot of the hijinks that followed in the show.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is going to be fascinating. Yes, we know all of this information now because of Rudy's book, but at the time, you're there, you're in the front row.
Yeah.
You know, tell us your, you know, your observations, you know, with this information, you know, now being out there.
Here's what happened. So, you know, the lights go down. So, you know, the people rush to the front of the stage to grab their spots. Ozzy comes out and they break into the first song.
I don't know.
Right. And of course, Ozzy's just there. Beyonce. You know, he's just doing this stuff. And after, I think maybe a verse, he just throws his hands down and says, "Fuck it," and walks off stage.
Oh my gosh.
And leaves the band. They're just standing there playing the song, looking at each other. It was like right around the time of the guitar solo. Randy Rhoads does his guitar solo, and then they go into the third verse or whatever. No Ozzy. They're just looking at each other. They decide to finish playing the song. And of course, we're all like, you know, what the hell? What happened to Ozzy? So they finish the song and walk off stage. You know, now the crowd is like, whoa, what's happening? Nobody knows what's going on. A couple minutes go by, not a word, not a peep. It's just, you know, the stage is dark and there's no Ozzy, no band, nobody's saying anything. Now the crowd starts getting agitated and they start going, Ozzy, Ozzy, Ozzy. The whole place is like, you know, going crazy. Finally, Ozzy stumbles back on the stage, goes up to the microphone and says, "Oh, sorry about that. I had to take a shit." You know, and then the band comes out as if nothing happened, and they just finish out the rest of the show.
Meanwhile, I think it was Sharon backstage saying, "You better get back out there no matter what." Is that right there? Is that
Yeah.
maybe
Yeah.
the passage from the book?
And that makes sense. I mean, I couldn't see. I was on the side of the stage where Randy Rhoads was. And then, you know, it was like a theater stage. So they had those long curtains, and he was back behind the curtains off the side of the stage.
Unbelievable.
But you couldn't really see him, you know. He was just back there. You didn't know what was going on.
So you have this awkward opening of the concert.
Right.
Did things smooth out from there?
Not really. I mean, Ozzy was a mess. He was, you know, really, he had a big bottle of Jack Daniels on stage that he would regularly just go, even in the middle of a song, just stop singing or whatever, go over and start chugging this Jack Daniels, and then come back up and just like really doing his thing where he's holding the microphone, you know, like Ozzy does. Just,
Wow.
Not much of a show, you know, as far as his showmanship. I mean, the band was amazing, you know.
Maybe that we can shift our focus to that. What do you remember about watching Randy Rhoads? One question I have for you: what guitars did he play? Do you remember?
As far as I remember, I just remember he used the one guitar, the white Les Paul.
Okay.
Now, he may have had that polka dotted Jackson thing, but I don't think he had that yet. I think that came later, but I think it was just the white Les Paul custom that he uses. And, you know, I remember, the first thing I remember was he was like a little guy, you know. You know,
Yes.
this little guitar player doll kind of thing with this big Les Paul, you know, the guitar looked, you know, as big as he was.
That's one of the things that is amazing. I was doing a little research for this podcast, and you know, according to Google, Randy Rhoads weighed 105 pounds, so he was very petite, and hence, you know, the guitar probably would have seemed relatively, you know, large compared to his body size. Maybe that explained his fluency and dexterity. Who knows? But
I understand he survived mainly on small plants, and you know,
any other memories about his performance that night?
No, you just that it was pretty flawless.
Mm,
You know, and the other amazing thing, the drummer, Tommy Aldridge,
yeah.
really good. Did a killer drum solo. You know,
I'm
Randy
sorry.
Rhoads, he just had great stage presence. You know, his
Yeah.
tone was amazing. He didn't miss a note.
Yeah.
You know, in spite of the insanity. It's like the band was totally professional and Ozzy was just a mess. That's kind of, you know, to encapsulate.
Right, and that brings up an important observation, which is that sometimes appearances can be deceiving because as somebody who's read a lot about Randy Rhoads in his life, you know, he was such a dedicated music student. I mean, he certainly, you know, looked the part of the rock star, had the, you know, amazing stage presence and musicality, but really was, you know, a student of the classical guitar, a guitar teacher. He was thrust into this world, and I'm not really sure that he enjoyed it that much. Rumor has it that before he died in 1982, his plans were to go back to school and pursue a degree in classical music, classical guitar.
Yeah, I think that's something that Rudy brought up as well. And that's why even last week in our last podcast, we were talking about Brad Gillis and what happened after Randy passed away. But there was, in 1982, there was quite a bit of talk of everyone moving on. You know, Randy possibly going back to California, opening a school was true passion with his mother in terms of classical. You know, Rudy, you know, once Randy passed away, you know, wanting to go back to his roots and going back to Quiet Riot. He was in a 1970s version of Quiet Riot, and then went on to, you know, rejoin Quiet Riot after Randy passed away, and went on to huge success with mental health. And so that's probably how Rudy's most known. And then he went on to Whitesnake with Tommy Aldridge, you know, during the, you know, Still in the Night era too. So he had, you know, just a nice run in the 80s outside of the Ozzy Osbourne band as well. But they were all planning on moving on. Rumor had it. So there was a lot. You can see why. There was just a lot of, imagine being, you know, a professional and clear-headed and young and dealing with this drama every night in terms of Ozzy and his unpredictable behavior. And Sharon Osbourne's pretty well known. She's a bit of a tyrant in the music business, you know,
Right.
And pretty well known, you know, to this day in other social circles, pop culture circles as well.
Another interesting contrast, and I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that something very significant happened in August of 1981 in the world of music. We don't think about it, but that's when MTV first launched. And later in the 80s, when you get into, you know, more like the Bon Jovi, U2, you know, that era of music where, you know, all of a sudden, you know, these concerts would perhaps have audiences up, you know, 12, 15,000 people. That for second leg of the Blizzard of Oz tour, I mean, for the most part, they were playing theaters, some arenas, but on average, it seems like most of the shows were, you know, 2,500 to, you know, 5,000 max. Hard rock and heavy metal music at that point didn't have the benefit of exposure via MTV because it was a brand new format that didn't exist, you know, prior to August of 1981.
And I know it was hit or miss per market. And I know this is a question for you, Pat. I couldn't find any sort of solid tour statistics for this show. I know the venue held about 2,500, and the next night they played to a sold-out show of 2,600. No, 5,600. What was the capacity? Was it?
Where was the show after that?
Darren, would you happen to remember that from the book by any chance? Rudy does mention it.
Fort Wayne. Maybe?
I'd have to look it up.
It might have been Fort Wayne. That might ring a bell.
Yeah.
But it was 5,600, and it was sold out. But what was the attendance like at the show in South Bend that night?
Oh, it was full. It was packed. Full house. And yeah, like I said, yeah, it was like a 3,000 seat venue. You're saying 2,500. That
Yeah,
sounds.
according to Wikipedia, it's a 2,600 seat capacity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was just a great place to see a concert because these bands would come through on their tours, and maybe you couldn't see these guys anywhere else. These kind of mid-level sort of AOR bands.
Hmm.
Also at that time, it was a much different live music scene. You know, I don't know what we paid for the tickets, but I'm sure it was like probably $10 or something ridiculous.
Yeah.
If that.
Right. So it was real easy to go see great bands in this, on a real stage.
So when you saw Randy Rhoads, just as a little sidebar, he was 24 years old. A couple of months later, he was voted Best New Guitarist by Guitar Player magazine. And I have here something kind of neat. This is a copy of Guitar Player. This is from November 1982. And it's the first time that Randy Rhoads appeared on the cover of Guitar Player. However, unfortunately, it happened, 6 months after he died in the plane crash. But his legacy is so far-reaching. It's amazing to talk to somebody who had the chance to see him live. I mean, I try and imagine what that would be like, and there's such limited footage, whether it's live concert footage. Obviously, there's some recordings, but perhaps that's part of what adds to the mystique is that there's just a finite amount that's available for fans to research
Right.
or look at.
Yeah. So in retrospect, I feel very lucky that I got to be right there.
Mm-hmm.
And when you're that age, you're a teenager, you're going to this concert. So these guys are all larger than life to you. Just the fact that they're on this stage doing this show, they're these mythical characters. But he seemed like that picture of him smiling. It seemed like he was pretty happy to be playing.
Yeah.
Maybe later on, excuse me, I got a little frog. Maybe later on, he may have gotten fed up with Ozzy's shenanigans.
Well, sure, and I think that
Ozzy is this kind of central character, and he's definitely has his voice and his style. But I just find it so interesting that somebody who is that out of it, personally, can gather this group of people around him that would really seem to be almost, it's hard to explain, almost like disconnected from Ozzy in a way and just focused on being great as a band.
Yeah, like this amazing support group.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, we've all had limited experience touring and traveling around. I know you have, Patrick. And I think if you have had the opportunity to, perform and travel, you develop an appreciation for, how some of these things after a while might become difficult to deal with depending on your disposition. So it would make sense that maybe after a year or two of, that craziness that you just might want to step back, pursue other things, take a break from it. So,
and there wasn't a large break at all. Like, I mean, I was looking at the diary of a Madman tour started 4 weeks after the Blizzard of Oz tour ended.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's grueling. I mean, I wouldn't know like you guys. I know you guys have both done professional tours and tour buses and living in these, confined spaces, but dealing with something like Ozzy and that sort of behavior and such.
Right. And they're
intimate setting.
When you hear about, I mean, touring is fun. There's no doubt about it. It's fun, but it does have its pitfalls. And especially if you're in a position like a band like Ozzy, which this is more the norm. You're going to be a band that has limited resources. Not everybody's going to be an arena rock band where you're a huge star. They got to play these smaller venues. They're on limited budgets.
Mm-hmm.
They're staying at the American Inn. They're not staying at the Hilton.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And again,
and then there's just the just speaking from my own experience, and probably this is, you know, you got these musicians who are going from small town to small town. You have no investment in these towns. You don't know where you are. Just showing up and like, oh, where are we playing tonight? Oh, it's this place in this town. And then you're staying at a, you know, a hotel you've never been at or whatever. So there's a lot of kind of isolation, and just sort of you're not really a part of the fabric of society in the normal ways. So you can, you know, it can kind of mess with your head where you just sort of live in this alternate universe. And then
And
if
especially then, I mean, this is
Especially
pre-cell
then,
phone,
yeah.
and I remember Kiss bringing a Kiss book I read where you would go off on tour and you were out of touch with your family for 4 months unless you
Right, there weren't
got
any
$2 a minute
phone-
on the phone, a long distance phone call.
Yeah.
You know, from the hotel room.
No
We're
internet,
different
no
world.
cell phones,
no internet, no cell phones.
email.
Right. So then you're like sort of, then you become like Ozzy. You're just going to go, all right, I guess I'll go down to the venue and hang out with the road crew, whatever, you know, if you're feeling.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, well, there's pros and cons to that. I mean, they're away from their family, for 4, 5, 6, 7 months, and no one knows exactly what they're doing.
Right.
Good or bad, because certainly couldn't get away with that sort of stuff these days.
And again, I think context matters. When we think of Ozzy Osbourne today, we think of this, iconic singer, one of the proprietors of heavy metal, lead vocalist for Black Sabbath, and then his solo career. Went on to have a successful reality show on MTV.
Household name.
A household name. In 1981, it was a different situation. His reputation was, depending on who you ask, dubious, perhaps. Certainly when I was a kid, if you mentioned Ozzy Osbourne, the bat story was always what people would bring up. If you're a musician, you were perhaps more intrigued by, the incredible musical performances featured on his records or, within his concerts. But it was just different. At that time, he was at a different place in his career, and the music industry was at a different place as well.
And especially if you back up a year and go to 1980, I mean, he was completely down and out, washed up, locked up in an LA hotel, on the verge of death. I mean, Sharon really,
Right.
Kind of took him under her wing and saved him and resurrected his career. And really, he went on to probably, at least in terms of pure sales, probably, surpass anything that he did with Black Sabbath, just from pure sales. As legendary as they are, Ozzy's solo career was huge in the 80s.
It's pretty amazing because, again, you wonder how can somebody who's like such a mess pull it together, and it's really had to be the people around him. Like that first album, I think those guys, Bob Daisley and who was the other guy?
Lee
Kerslake.
Yeah.
Kerslake, yes.
Helped him write all these songs and did great studio performances, and Randy Rhoads, of course. So he somehow always got the right people around him, like really
Which is
good people.
One of the formulas for success is, assembling that team.
People.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody, if it wasn't him, somebody around him was guiding him in the right direction. Or
I think Sharon
saying, no, it's going to be this guy or that guy. I don't know. I really don't know how much say he has in the band members, that he picks.
Well, I think Sharon had a big. It's an interesting point too, because as incredible as Lee and Bob's performance was on the records, they recorded all with Randy, recorded all the instrumental for both Blizzard of Oz and Diary of a Madman. Sharon thought that they were too old school and wanted like a younger, kind of hipper, musicians for the live show. And this is also mentioned in Rudy's book, but that's, bringing in a young guy like Rudy and Tommy. I mean, Tommy had actually had quite a history too. He was in Black Oak, Arkansas. So he had been around the scene for a while, but she was always like really tuned in terms of image And that's why she wanted to go to that Jackson 5 show too and see what they were doing, see if she could come up with some ideas for the next tour, the Diary of a Madman tour,
Right.
which was pretty elaborate if you're going to take a look at some of the footage from that, because there are some there's a couple of pro shot.
Well,
Speak of the Devil, it was pro shot, so there's some footage for that.
now I am friends with Carmine Appice, who played with Ozzy for a while. And he actually had a falling out with Sharon. I don't know if I'm at liberty to speak of it, but essentially,
It's in his book. It's in his book. I'll get into some
That's
of it.
true.
I read it.
it's like, but Sharon had apparently, had an iron fist with everything. I guess Carmine was, is really a self-promoter, and he had his whole drum set, with Carmine Appice on the double kick drums and everything, and would try to put his own merchandise. And so then they butted heads because, Sharon's like, this is the Ozzy Osbourne band, not the Carmine Appice band.
Oh.
And I guess, she threw him off the tour because he was just too, she didn't like that he was getting all this attention.
Yeah, it's in his book, so it's public knowledge. By the way, that's another Lee's book, for fact's sake, the original bass player from the studio sessions, from these two albums, and Carmine's book. They're both fantastic, by the way. Right up there with Rudy's book. If you guys have some free time and haven't read them, they're both fantastic.
Yeah, that's why these books are so incredible, is because they give you, firsthand accounts. And
right. Yeah.
Fortunately, in the case of Rudy, he must have kept a diary, because his autobiography is very meticulous in terms of dates and locations and just all this behind the scene information that's, again, if you're a fan of those records or of that period of time in Ozzy's career, that book's incredible. Yeah. I'll also mention this book as well, which is by Joel McIver, right? It is pretty interesting as well, if anyone wants to check that out. He has interviews with Tommy Aldridge and other members of the crew as part of that book that I found really enjoyable. Again, if this is something that viewers find interesting and want to school themselves.
Love to check that out. And I have another question for you, Pat, which maybe is covered in that book. But Darren and myself, being you saw Randy Rhoads, and we missed him by a couple of years. And then he was just an absolute legend after he passed away in all the guitar magazines, and he almost became more popular. It seemed like he was more popular after his death than before.
Definitely.
Can you speak in terms of so Darren and I were kind of getting into this sort of guitar stuff in '86, and it's Randy Rhoads, but this is already 3 or 4 years after he had passed away. You were able to see it from both sides. Is there anything that you could, speak to in terms of, the surge of popularity, or the tribute live album that came out a few years later, where some tapes were, archive tapes were discovered and remastered and whatnot?
Well, I think any iconic musician or artist or anything, he developed a style that no one had really heard before in that context. So by the time you guys were getting into it, it was already, Shane, you just disappeared for some reason.
There he is.
There he is. Okay. Like any iconic artist. So by the time you guys were into it, he had already been in circulation for a few years, and now people were kind of starting to copy that style, and Ozzy was sort of getting replacement guitarists that were similar to that. So, he sort of launched.
Well, he was one of the proprietors of that, for lack of a better description, sort of the neoclassical aspect of the early 80s, these musicians and guitarists that were tapping into classical and Baroque influences. And obviously, other players would expand upon it, like Yngwie and so on. But Randy Rhoads, by virtue of having the vehicle of Ozzy's legacy and fan base, was able to contribute that and develop his own sound, and it was also seen and appreciated, which makes
Right,
a
and
huge
it wasn't
difference.
yeah, it wasn't just the his style was unique, but as with anything, there are sort of these unquantifiable parts of the equation. It was everything. It was his sound. He had a unique sound.
Yeah.
He was had virtuoso musicianship. He had a style that he infused into this hard rock genre. I mean, really, you really had, maybe Ritchie Blackmore sort of had that neoclassical
Yeah.
style, but up until him, it really wasn't incorporated into this format. And so it made it cool to have this like heavy metal, hard rock sound
Yeah.
with that melding the neoclassical style. And really the sound was, just another part of it, that he had such, it was really pleasing to listen to, but still edgy.
Yeah.
And what happened in the years after his death, I think it spawned so many people like Darren and myself, and probably every guitar player that I knew at the time, to go take classical guitar lessons. From the instrumental D. If that didn't happen, like even by the time I went to college, every guitarist was a classical guitar and studied classical guitar. I mean, I don't think that would have happened, or we would have had any interest in that had it not been for Randy Rhoads.
I agree.
Right. So, but up until then, until he sort of brought this style to the forefront, rock guitar was mainly like kind of blues based. Heavy metal.
Indeed, yeah. I know that, when we were kids, when I was 14 or 15, I mean, I just geeked out on Randy Rhoads so much. We, little shameless plug here, but we had a band called Sweden, and we played a concert and, did I Don't Know with the Randy Rhoads guitar solo in it. Just recently had it remastered and, released on streaming services. When I listen to it, it takes me back to that, sort of innocence of, being a teenager and just, loving guitar for all the right reasons and wanting to become a better musician, and just having this great reverence for Randy Rhoads and his contributions to the instrument and that style of music. Yeah.
Yeah, because he kind of gathered all these little, he had that sort of, that rock and roll Blackmore style, and then Eddie Van Halen tapping and neoclassical soloing. So it was really it was unique. It's difficult, to find your own style, your own voice. That's really difficult, and he nailed it.
He did nail it. Yeah. Well, I think this has been an incredible conversation, and hopefully all of you watching have had a chance to develop an appreciation for what it may have been like to see Randy Rhoads live if you didn't have the chance. There are a limited number of videos on YouTube where you can see Randy perform. I believe one is from April 1981 that was recorded in Rochester, New York. Is that called After Hours? That special?
Yeah, and it's the only professional, and it's not in front of a live studio audience. I think it's just in a television studio, but I think it's the only, quote, professionally filmed footage available of that particular band.
Yeah. And even given how limited that is in terms of its duration, you'll develop an appreciation instantly for, his guitar genius and who he was and why he's exerted such a huge influence on musicians to this day. Just go on Instagram and search Randy Rhoads and you'll see he's got more fans today than he's ever had. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. No, and I feel lucky that, it's so funny because at that time it's, unbeknownst, you don't know what the future holds. And I feel lucky to have been able to experience that.
One final question. When did you find out that Randy Rhoads, how did you find out that Randy Rhoads had died?
Oh, that I don't really remember, but, it was, probably in school, like in the halls in high school. Oh, did you hear, Randy Rhoads died in a plane crash? Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was in the high school halls. That's usually where you
hear everything.
yeah, you get these rumors or
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was wondering if that would make the mainstream news at night at that particular time, or did you have to wait for the next month of Circus or Hit Parade to come out to find out about it in terms of the rock magazines?
Well, no,
Just in terms of how news traveled back then.
yeah, no, definitely on the rock radio stations, you would hear all that kind of news. There was a lot. The rock scene with bands then was really such a big part of American culture, and the radio DJs, and then later on the MTV VJs became the arbiters of this culture.
Yeah.
Which really had been kind of building for the 60s, 70s, and then by the time you get to the 80s, it's really kind of at its peak, I think.
Yeah.
Or maybe just because I was a teenager and it was all so saturated, but in a good way. And by that time they had figured out the legs were all in place for this structure of radio, TV, and then cable, and it all came together at that point.
Yeah. Well, this has been a fascinating conversation. Again, for those who are interested, check out Rudy Sarzo's book, Off the Rails, and tune in next time for our next episode. I really appreciate you all watching.
Thanks, guys.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys.